we need a minute buffer before the swearing thing goes live. Let me tell you a story about a thing that I'm going to make up. No, I'm not that good at improv, but you know,
You're that good at swearing, though, I'm sure.
Something. Keep
oh,
going.
I'm so good at swearing. I am just kidding.
Well, so I have no complaints about the Lord of the Rings. Just zero. It's
We're going to
spoils
start
me
with
for
that.
everything else. And once I read Lord of the Rings or even the Silmarillion, there's just the richness and the depth and the insight.
The fact that it's in black and white.
Else.
And you get to hear details of every single breakfast they ever have, ever on every single day of their year-long journey so far.
It's not every single. It's there's a lot of talk about what's happening, but I listened to the audiobook, I understood how much there was that was just in conversation. I would say that there's more song than there is landscape detail in the Lord of the Rings, at least in the Fellowship of the Ring. And I know the songs. When I was reading them, I skipped them, but listening to the audiobook.
Why would you skip them?
When I read them, like in the past, I didn't. For this, I did. I listened to the audiobook the whole way.
Right. I don't know about Tom, but I skip the songs because I actually have a tough time reading poetry and things like that, where it's like I don't understand the meter, or I don't understand. It's a song, where's the music, right, or whatever. So I don't just have it in my head, and so that's why I had like such a huge appreciation for them incorporating some of that into the movies. And even like the BBC broadcast gets like the Misty Mountains in, and you get those deep voices and all of that stuff, and that's fantastic. But when I'm reading it, I have no idea. It's just words to me, and I could tell it's supposed to be, you know, slightly different, but I like the best I can do is I can look for the rhymes and try and hit the tempo that way. But I have a big problem trying to read them. It's my thing.
That's part of how it's. I would say that the songs and the poetry are I'd say they're almost the landscape, the soul of the world of Middle Earth. It's at its best, in its original creation, it's supposed to be a land of song and breakfast, almost. Where it's I'm serious.
That's a very Hobbit centric point of view.
I think so. You know. And I think so. I think that's part of the point of Lord of the Rings is that it's
singing, but we don't hear about their breakfast. I'm just saying. So
I comforts and breakfasts and song and merriment is kind of the heart of what makes Middle Earth great. And I think that's why I changed my name Tom Bombadil. I know you talked about Bombadil to death last time.
Hey, Tom Bombadil, my boots are yellow.
He almost represents how little Middle Earth as a world should really cares about this kind of epiphenomena of like Sauron and Ring and greatness and power. How small the great big evil that all the characters in this movie or the old characters in the book are worried about is nothing. He gets ruined by a hobbit, right? That's almost kind of the point. This is a world where the greatness of everything turns out the great things tend to be the littlest things, and the littlest things tend to be the great things that have great power. It's a real inverse of I think a lot of what other epic storytelling is trying to do, and even RPGs where the focus is on power and on leveling up and growing in power, whereas the emphasis in the Lord of the Rings, I think, is in how power tends to blind you. Power and greatness tends to blind you. And I think that's what we see absolutely in Book 2 of Fellowship of the Ring. Welcome to, we weren't recording.
Longest intro ever. We've got one of those Lord of the Rings style intros for the Lord of the Rings. There's one point that I want to counter. I think somebody got blinded by the travel and recipe blog that is the Lord of the Rings, because Frodo is clearly writing a blog about his journey and what they had, and like make sure that you cook the tomatoes with the sausages so that you get that moistness, you know. So like I don't know.
It's almost kind of a counterpoint to the whole other side of the story, which is very concerned with, you know, this existential crisis. Oh no, there's Sauron's going to take over the world, and even Tom Bombadil.
Just so we're clear, the armies of Mordor not an existential crisis like that. You know, those are very real creatures very really eating and murdering and
Oh,
possibly
that's
in
I
that
guess that's
order,
what I meant. I'm sorry.
you know.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
No, I know. I get what you're saying, right? And from a purist kind of perspective, that's what Tolkien wanted people to take away from the books, right?
Mhm.
He wanted everybody to think that, you know, the hobbits have got it made. And maybe we should be worried about a singing and breakfast instead of what that evil overlord is doing over there. But, you know, certainly from like, you know, an American perspective, a Western perspective, and that sort of thing, like he also put knights in the book and heroes and things like that, and they are fighting literal darkness, right? This isn't like, oh, Sauron's made some bad choices, but he's not really a bad guy. There is no gray area. Sauron is the latest incarnation in a line of dark lords, and he is trying to rape, pillage, burn, murder, and wreck all of Middle Earth. And it could be just because he doesn't like to sing and whatever. And if you get into the subtext, like it goes all the way back to Iluvatar, right? Iluvatar brought the universe into being by singing. So that is fundamentally the point of the Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth and all of that stuff. But I think it also needs to be acknowledged that there's literal fire, literal armies, and literal swords that are being applied to people. You know, so
that's true. But
so
even
like
that, as we this is obviously spoiler filled, and we all know the story from watching the movies before, that ends up being destroyed and undone in various ways, and even in the book, I think the movie's a bit more dramatic about it, by a couple of hobbits and then like this weird warped hobbit, and they play in a volcano, and one of them dies, and one loses a finger.
I mean, it's almost accidental though too, right? Like at the end of the day, like to me, the takeaway isn't, you know, the triumph over good over evil because good is so incorruptible, which is kind of the trajectory of the story. But it's literally like even Frodo couldn't hack it at Mount Doom, and the ring gets destroyed because the hobbits fought. Now, don't get me wrong, Frodo had to take it 99.9% of the way to, you know, to the end, but it's Smeagol that gets the job done, but mostly because he falls into the pit, right? It's Frodo doesn't say, "I renounce you, Sauron," and like cast the ring into the fire. Like there's
that's one of the great things I think Lord of the Rings doesn't fit. I think a criticism I hear now and then that it's just simplistic good versus evil, because Frodo is crucially different. Just the wrong one. It's saying something else about good and evil. There's real good, there's real evil, and yet all of the good characters are tempted. Galadriel in this chapter is tempted. Gandalf in the first book is tempted. The only one who's not tempted is the Eru Iluvatar hidden in the background, right?
You don't know if he's an Eru Iluvatar though.
Well, I'm saying Eru Iluvatar is not even mentioned by name in Lord of the Rings, but he does a couple little things in the background that you kind of have to. If you don't know he's there, you won't see him. Kind of things. The name isn't even said. So
interesting. I'm not sure I know this much actually, but
So but that's the whole. That's I think if playing against the. What was the Dresden Files? Took me a while to think of it. Where
other
the big
podcast,
where the big principle is, the more powerful something is, the more restricted it is. Lord of the Rings has a very different effect. The more powerful something is, the more blinded it is, with the exception of the ultimate good, which accomplishes grand purposes with tiny little movements, and tiny little touches here and there. So that's more of an issue of choices. That'll be that. I think that we'll see that as we go on. I don't want to get too far afield, but
sure.
That's how I'm reading this, and the conversations and such are just playing on these themes of good and evil that aren't just simplistic. That's a big takeaway I have at the moment. It's not just simplistic. There's an interesting complexity there.
So, like Lord of the Rings does have grays, but there are certain places that you're not typically going to run into that, right? Like, you know, I've mentioned on the show when we were talking about the other Lord of the Rings show that nobody wants to mention, but with Rings of Power, like it really kind of clicked to me that like the reason why there is good and there is evil is because of the literal nature of the world of things, right? And the reason why like the sun burns the orcs is because it's literally freaking elf magic. That the sun is the Silmarils being orbited by, what I'm mixing my names, but anyway, it's by Elrond's father. It's like, of course, that would burn the orcs because it's not just like it's not a fusion ball of gas like it would be in a normal cosmology. It's literally magic, and so you get those, the sun is cleansing and burns away evil and shit because it's literally a force of good, and they're literally evil because they're a corruption of that good, even without passing moral judgment of like what good and evil looks like, they're literally a twisted antithesis of what the elves are. So they're diametrically opposed forces.
That twisting is the temptation. I think we see
that's where it happens. Yeah,
and I think we see this, and this is the thing I was going to talk about in the dynamic of what I think is the point of Book 2 of Lord of the Rings. That is Book 2 of the Fellowship. You see that folly and failure of the great and the very good side of things in the Fellowship. You have whose idea was it to go over the mountains? Right? It was Aragorn's. Whose idea was it to go through Moria? It was Gandalf's, and Gandalf dies. And then,
exactly. I actually thought it was quite interesting how it's Gandalf who wants to go through Moria, and in the movies they kind of merged it, and Gandalf doesn't want to go through Moria.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, and then in
they changed the setup of Moria a lot in the movies in a very understandable way, because in the book it was at the Council of Elrond that Gloin, Gimli's father, was describing that we haven't heard of Balin or Ori or Oin in 30 years. They went to Moria and they've never come back, and we don't know what's happened to them. And so that was always a setup of like, maybe we do have to go under there, but we don't know what we're going to find. Instead, in the movies, that Gimli was like, it's going to be a grand royal welcome with feasting and roaring fires, and everything will be so much easier going under the mountain rather than over it.
Right off the boat. Sure.
Yeah.
That, as far as I can tell, that was a way of getting across what they had wanted. Now, they might have been troubled, but he was really hoping that there was something good there. Gimli, I guess Peter Jackson figured that Lord of the Rings needed a bit more comic relief. And in the book, the comic relief is the Tom Bombadil and the songs and the kind of the cathartic mourning for Gandalf in Lothlorien. That's what the relief is. But if you cut that out, then you turn Gimli into kind of the butt of the joke, just to make the mood not completely dreary and miserable. So
I think it just underscored how more horrible it was. It was like he was expecting to be able to see his family. Instead, he found his cousin's tomb. It was like he found the loss of his people. And you get to see him mourning, and then he got to have a fight, which he was quite excited about. But it's like,
what are we waiting for?
I see the Fellowship, the two books of the Fellowship, especially the first, but even the second, as almost a story of dread. Right, where it's just they don't really know what's happening, and there's just an increasing ratcheting up of dread, where you get the incremental thing with Old Man Willow and these little barrel wights, and then the Black Riders, and then it just keeps going up from there throughout these two books. And I think part of the point is that as that ramps up, then we see that all of the great figures of the Fellowship are failing with Aragorn and Gandalf, and then finally Boromir, who doesn't die yet, but Boromir fails by being entranced by the idea of just taking the ring and using the power. He falls almost immediately as soon as there's... And then Aragorn is troubled and doesn't notice this and doesn't challenge Boromir. Lets it get out of control. So that is where I will say, I think this is where the Eagles thing doesn't work, because it the whole thing with the eagle. Why don't they just take the Eagles? Well, this book is especially setting up why thinking in those terms of greatness and plans, and rather than just trust, thinking of those grand plans doesn't work, because those are the grand plans that all these characters keep coming up with, and they're all failing, or clearly bad in the case of Boromir's. So,
well, I mean, so the Eagles thing is a meme, and I think it needs to be addressed if you're going to address it. But I think ultimately, in world, there are very two solid explanations about why, even if they did try to use the Eagles, it wouldn't have worked, right? The first one is I won't even butcher the name, but the King of Eagles, right? If he's going to be there, absolutely is going to be tempted and possibly corrupted by the ring, right? So that's right. That's like he's not even going to make it to Moria or to Mordor because he's going to be corrupted in flight. Basically, is a very large possibility. The other one is that Sauron is not without his defenses, as we've finally see towards the end of the saga, where the Nazgul get upgraded to Wyvern riders and whatnot, and there's no reason to believe that that the Eagles would be able to bypass that. Or that couldn't be brought to bear earlier. Because I think even in the books, and I mean, this is wildly skipping ahead, obviously, but it's like when the ring gets destroyed, the haze and the smoke that, defines Mordor basically gets cleared out by a northern wind. That's where the Eagles are able to come in. So even notwithstanding the other 2 points, it seems like there were also natural hazards around Mordor that they weren't able to overcome, and so I do like the meme. When I first encountered the whole like fly you fools and like the half an hour explanation about all the code that Gandalf was talking, I was like, man, this is really clever. And it would be amazing if J.R.R. Tolkien intended that. But I don't believe it. And then,
I mean, a page before Gandalf fell, he said fly when they were running. He meant fly as in flee. And is like that is how he uses that word. It means run as fast as you can, get away from here as fast as you can. Not the same thing as take Eagles.
Right. Yeah. So like it's a great meme, obviously. Like it's still split the community, and I think you get some that know that it's a meme and still want to feed into it because trolling and whatever else. But I think there are very good, solid reasons why it's just like really a non-starter. And even if we say, okay, you're right, Gandalf was talking about the Eagles the whole time, what does that look like? It looks like failure. That's what it looks like. It looks like
another failed plan by Gandalf.
right? Yeah.
Right. So and if you're thinking about it, with what are they faced by in Aragorn's plan? Magical winter. What are they faced by in Gandalf's plan? Literally his mortal equal, who he barely killed.
Fire and shadow in living
fire
form.
And shadow and terror and mobs and death and gloom and despair and misery. That's what Gandalf's plan
fair,
is.
He did solo it though, so I mean,
that's true. The Gandalf the tank, right?
Like it wasn't all that bad. So
then killed by fall damage, but
right.
So and then of course Boromir's plan ends up. What happens? He does die, right? I'm pretty sure. I haven't read Two Towers in a while. I'm pretty sure he still dies.
He dead. Yeah, he's very dead. So, like, I don't remember exactly the timing and where it happens in the books, but like, so I believe the technical term is called pincushion. Which was one of the things that I quibbled with the movie a little bit, because in the movie he's very dead and he's been shot numerous times and they make it very dramatic and whatever. But like, but that there were like 6-ish arrows, but
that's
like I think in the books it's like more like our arrows will blot out the sun, like that one where it's like you block the falling arrows with your body, and like Boromir was on the underside of that, but like Boromir went out heroically right at the end of it all, and that's where like you get a lot of quibbles about whether or not he was a heroic character. Like, is he a bad guy because he fell? Does he get a chance to redeem himself? Like all of that stuff. But either way, he presented himself as a knight, at the end, in my opinion. And, especially, defending Merry and Pippin and that sort of thing. He gets that little bit of redemption, but yeah.
And I mean, of course, we're going to be comparing it to the movies, but Sean Bean killed it and just showing of how he wanted it for good reasons. And he wanted it to help his people, the thing that he's been trying to do for his entire life and his entire family's been doing for generations, to protect them. it's interesting. They took some of the words that he said to Frodo in the book and said that instead in the Council of Elrond in the movie, but it was still exactly his ethics of like, we should use this thing to protect ourselves. And he's never really gotten away from that idea, even though he backed down. But as soon as Frodo takes the ring away and he's no longer corrupted by it, he realizes everything that's wrong. And he was scared. And he was horrified at what he had done. And like, wonderful death.
One other interesting change, I think, in from the movies, and this is from recollection, is Aragorn's reluctance to be king.
Yeah, and he's it's clear for him pretty much from the start of the book, right? That he's already gone through that journey. He knows he's gonna like go and reclaim it.
Yeah, he was already carrying Narsil in the beginning when we meet him.
Yeah. Like when he meets them in Bree, it's pretty much like, well, this is the first step on my journey to be king or whatever, right? Which that was one of my quibbles early on, but like movie Aragorn is still
like a wooden
faultless
character, right? Because he is still troubled about leading.
Sure.
After the death of Ganon, he's still troubled, and that's a critical. His being troubled and being unable to lead, is a critical failing of the Fellowship. Even after they've been through so much together, even they have all the advantages of Galadriel's gifts and everything.
I mean, he's struggling with divided loyalties. He knows he has to go to Minas Tirith to be king. He has to go there, and he wants to go there. But he also has to protect Frodo. He has two, like, almost divinely given duties. How does he do both? And as they're realizing that Frodo is going to leave and go alone, and he still wants to, like, okay, but I'll go with, like, Frodo and Gimli, and so it's a smaller group, but he still feels like it's him personally that needs to protect him.
Right. And so that, I think the reason for the change, I don't know. If I were to guess, the reason for the change would probably be it's a more interesting drama for moviegoers and easier to communicate.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
then you get to say, well, what's the title of the third movie and the title of the third volume? Return of the King. Oh, okay. So it transforms the
spoilers.
Right.
Don't you just hate it when they spoil it in the title? Sorry.
It transforms a very difficult to adapt drama into an easier to understand and easier to represent drama for the screen. It costs something out of the coherence of the book, but it's a fine adaptation. I'm not complaining about that adaptation. It's one of those trade-offs that happens with adaptations. I've made my peace with that. So
it's a good change. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's an improvement. It was certainly very enjoyable, but it does translate well. It is something that now people who don't know the character get to experience with him and understand the ramifications of all of this. And I think in the movies, maybe I should say especially the extended version of the movie, as you get to see him come about, like, because he wanted to run away from the idea of being Isildur's heir. But Boromir's like, come back with me to this place and we can solve everything this way. Come back to Minas Tirith instead of running away from what you think is your shame, and it isn't his at all. It is a different struggle. It's a good one.
I think it's easier to understand also because it's a much more common character trope in movies, to be frank. Like troubled heroes who are reluctant to take up the mantle. It goes down easy. I don't think anybody is surprised about the arc of a character like that. If I told you there was a troubled hero, you'd know just from those two words what the story was. But it gives you something to latch onto and something to identify with and something to bring to the movie as you enjoy it. It's kind of I guess there's that element too, where it's just makes it more easy it makes it go down easier. I don't know if that makes sense or if you guys agree.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it makes sense. It's just like, I think a lot of people need to realize that, like, I'm just trying to strike the right balance without inviting like a flame war of some kind. But it's like Lord of the Rings is for fantasy, like a lot of, again, don't flame me for this because it's forming still as we're going on, but it's kind of like what Shakespeare did just in general for literature, in the sense that like a lot of this shit existed before him, but he brought it together and he semi-codified it, right? And so like Tolkien didn't invent dwarves, he didn't invent elves, he didn't invent the troubled hero or anything like that. But when you start following the tropes back, right, their common origin point in many cases is going to be Lord of the Rings, right? Especially in like a high fantasy setting. There's a lot of things that he's going to get credit for foundationally, even though he didn't necessarily invent it. And so like, yeah, sure, you know, like the troubled hero thing is there and people can identify it, but they can identify it because, you know, because of Lord of the Rings, you know, whether they realize it or not, you know.
In the book, the troubled hero is Frodo, not Aragorn, though. But I agree that it's in
all of them.
Yeah, and I mean, like Frodo's troubled by his burden and that sort of thing, but like Frodo, like by the time you get to Lothlorien, he kind of understands it because he's seen it a few times, right? Because like I think he tempts Galadriel on purpose, right? Like even in the book. He's just kind of like, hey, I got this ring, do you want to take it, type of thing. And it's almost both like they're like playing a part and they don't fully understand or whatever, but like Frodo initiates it rather than like, I think in other cases he accidentally, like fully accidentally offers it to Gandalf, not knowing what that would be. And Gandalf is like, nope, that's a hard no from me, dog, because if the ring is what I think it is, you know, that's going to be a problem. You know, he just accidentally tempts Boromir by being there. You know, like Aragorn is also semi-tempted, but in a sense, like Aragorn had already made that decision that it's like, you know, I cannot carry it, especially because I'm Isildur's heir, you know, I'm sure, and that sort of thing. But like with Galadriel, like he does it on, like he kind of offers it like on purpose this time, I feel like. And so like, yeah, I mean, yeah, Frodo, like the classic line, right? It's not even, it doesn't line up with this thing, but Frodo's line is, you know, I wish this hadn't happened to me, roughly, right? Paraphrased. And it's like, well, sure, nobody wants to be going through all this shit, you know? So like, yes, he's reluctant, but it's not the same kind of, it doesn't strike me as the same kind of reluctance somehow.
And that's what makes it interesting to me. I don't worry about tropes. I worry about execution.
Sure.
And even if I say troubled hero and it turns out, you know, it's the popcorn version, there's still good execution along the way. As long as it's integrated well into the character and it makes sense as a whole, and isn't just frosting on the top. It's part of the cake. It's part of the flavor of the whole progress. Then it works, right? That's one of the great things with Lord of the Rings is it's creating for like barbarian traditions what people at his time were saying and was trying to do for Greco-Roman mythologies and traditions. So going into that, you pretty much had the Brothers Grimm, and you had people playing off Greek myths, and that's what he did. Though was to create this brand new voice of the kind of Northern European folk tales. And he's also explicitly Christianizing it too, which is without even doing any religion to it. There's no explicit religion. There's just the one supreme God, and there's his angel.
But yeah, the influences should be acknowledged, and like I haven't done an analysis of what those look like, but I mean the fact that he's basically pub buddies with C.S. Lewis, you know, there's almost certainly you know going to be some overlap, and they often had, you know, I don't know, competitions is the word that comes to mind about, you know, the different approaches to writing and that sort of thing. But
and in that writing, their influences aren't just like storybook tellings of myths, which is fine. It's fine that if that is, they're like doing this partially or mostly for fun. And Tolkien's big work. His model is Beowulf. That's his starting point. His his great scholarship as a young man was on Beowulf. And old pre-Christian medieval legends, and that's his world of scholarship, and the development of language in that period is his field of scholarship. So I'm sure that if you came across him in like the little pub where they met, and you said, hey, you know what, I think there's a problem with that story because it doesn't follow the conventions of storytelling, he might look at you very blankly and say, but I want to write it this way.
Who are you and why are you bothering?
Yeah, this is fun. But this is what's there were friends of his who was like, Oh, the elves, more elves. Like,
Right.
I like them.
Right. The elves are badass. Totally a quote from Tolkien himself. So, no, but I mean, you said they were writing it for fun. I think it should also be acknowledged they were writing it for children largely as well. Not that underwrites it at all, but I think you know, to understand the background or to understand the foundation of it. And you know, one of my favorite things is that largely he started writing down Lord of the Rings, like writing it, because he was doing it slightly as an oral tradition for bedtime stories for his kids. And then they would be like, but you forgot about this detail, or what about this thing? And you know, so that damn the boy quote, you know, that everybody knows, like I should get that on a t-shirt maybe, but my kids wouldn't understand. You know, but it just like, you know, because the kids were wrapped up in the story and they wanted to know the details. So he started writing some of it down for consistency as much as anything. You know, so like, and again, that kind of oversells that part of it as well. But like, these are all part of the mix, right? It's all, you know, like, sure, you know, him studying Beowulf, that's news to me, but that makes sense where he would have gotten,
it's one of the more famous things about him is like that's also because of the linguistic stuff of everything. Right. Like if you get into Rohan, and especially in the Two Towers movie when they're singing the song and for the funeral of I forgot his name, her cousin that died, and Eowyn was
Theoden's
singing,
kid, you know.
That one, yeah.
The prince.
Okay. I thought you were talking.
I haven't read the book.
If
you don't remember his name either because he dies off screen, right? But you know,
except for in the extended, you can kind of they have a moment of going to find his body after the skirmish and all that, whatever. But if you turn on the subtitles, and like that is exactly Old English. He pulled that straight from something like Beowulf, and even like the names, like Eomer, it means horse famous, which is it's from Beowulf. And
gotcha.
Yeah, it's totally a thing about him.
So the whole thing's a fan fiction? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Not even a doubt in my mind. I'll say that. Yes, absolutely.
Sorry for introducing that if that's news to anybody, but
I mean, that's what he was doing with like the Cat and the Fiddle song that Frodo had done at Bree. It's like he wanted to make this more of a coherent story, and so he wrote it out longer and something that kind of put a story into the song and made sense. And then so he's taking like the dwarves that he loved out of Norse and putting them into the same things with like the Finnish and the elves and Beowulf. It was his fan fictions. Massive.
I gotta say, this is making me feel a lot better as a dungeon master who steals from fucking everything. And like my players are like, that was so much fun. And I'm like, you have no idea what a fraud I am.
It's also like I know this is a random piece of trivia I know about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. Is that a lot of the places in the books are named after places here in Denmark? I just pulled up a quick list. It's Helm's Deep. There's a place here in Denmark called Hjelm Dyb, which is funny. Isengard. We have a place called Isgård, which is Isengard basically. Eskerod, Eskeroth, and Aarhus, a big city. Aarhus, which is like apparently has like a big fascination with. It's a specific region of Denmark that he's been very fascinated with.
I'm kind of curious about the history though too for that, because it's like are those like ancient names or are those like more recent? Because like, you know, because people obviously they name things after names. Some of the Lord of the Rings stuff too.
Yeah, no, those are old hundreds of years old.
Huh.
There's
he didn't have Google Maps, so that's why I'm a little curious. Like, did he have like a hand-drawn map of like the area that he was like, oh, those are some cool names, I'm writing that shit down, you know? Like
maybe, you know, he was with how you know, dwarves and elves and everything, a lot of that was Nordic mythology and quite different before it got pulled into his world and got turned into fantasy as we know it today. So I think he's probably just been interested in Nordic mythology and the area, which would be here and Sweden and Norway and stuff, right?
Yeah, but you can't forget that Gandalf is named. It's one of the elves, and he's Wind Elf, I think, in one of the Eddas. It's just in one of the poems of Norse mythology. Yeah. He took his fan fictions and changed history with it.
Right. No, I mean it's great, and it's like not even a dig. It's like fascinating for me to learn even more. Like I don't do a lot of study on him as a person, like a lot of the trivia I know about him is like incidental to just hanging out with other Lord of the Rings nerds and picking up, stuff along the way. So that's pretty interesting, but yeah.
His first, I think you talked about this in the last episode. It's almost his own fan fiction for his fan fiction languages.
Yeah.
Right. So and
right. Yeah,
that
that's
commitment to detail, I think, shows itself in that he wanted to explain why things were the way they were in the languages, and that led to a sense of what the world was like, and that led to stories about particular people in the world. And while he's at it, why are these different languages? Well, what if there were these fantasy creatures? They have their different languages, and well, they relate to each other in different ways. And and there's some really ugly sounds you can make. That's Orcish, right? That's Morgoth. That's Morgoth. It's an evil language. It makes you sound like a Klingon. Basically, Klingon and Morgoth have the same design ethos, that you have to do disgusting things with your mouth. That's kind of the joke.
Horrible slanders of Germans.
Well, I don't know about that. Tolkien would know more about that than I would. But yeah. So it's really, I know it's a really fascinating set of influences. And I guess my point is, it sells the mythology and the reality of the world better than just coming with random syllables. People try to emulate that, and without the internal logic, without that being the heart of it, it kind of comes off.
Well, they don't have the background, right? They don't have the foundation, and I've actually seen a post of that on the writing subreddit where it's just like, hey, look, man, it's all well and cool. Everybody wants to be Tolkien, right? Everybody wants to write their amazing thing and whatever, and write their language. But the dude was a linguist, and so like, if you're not a linguist, you're probably not going to get similar results, right? You can't just be like, oh yes, I too would like to bake a really cool castle cake, or whatever, but I'm actually not a baker. Is that a problem, or whatever? And it's like, these guys are, they do
write what you know, play to your strengths. And I think
that means go get several PhDs and then write down the story that you've been wanting to.
Did he just like Jim Butcher, which is, I think, one of Jim Butcher's strengths. He writes what he knows. He writes funny pulp stuff with a lot of great mythology, the kind you can get out of books, the kind you get out of legend. That's good enough for urban fantasy, and that works well. And he's got a very functional world there.
Right.
It's one of the advantage. It's not a matter of stay in your lane. Just know your strengths and play to your strengths. Right. I don't want
to play with something. Research it. That's more of the point. If you want to write about Age of Sail, you might need to go do a lot of research on how those ships worked.
Exactly. Which, like, what's his face? White whale guy. Right? That's what
Moby Dick?
Isn't that basically what Moby Dick is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whaling textbook with a story wrapped around it, I think I've heard people call it.
But it makes the whaling stuff a metaphor for sin and the human condition and heavy stuff like that, which is why it's so miserable. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the whole point of Moby Dick.
What?
Apparently.
You don't like Moby Dick? It seems like it'd be right up your alley.
Does it have someone to root for? Do you root for the whale? Do you root for not the whale? I don't know.
The warp whale.
The white.
Yeah, shut up.
If I'm going to read Moby Dick, I'll just watch Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, exactly. That's great too. I was gonna say, like, I think I'm gonna read Moby Dick like a sports game now, where it's just like, I'm not rooting for either the captain or the whale. I'm rooting for good plays by both teams. So, so.
So,
you know what I'm excited for? Watching the movies for next time.
Yeah. Well, I think it should happen. I personally vote with Andreas. I just don't know if we need a campaign about it. That's all.
Yeah, I don't know. We can. I watched the movie yesterday. It's just like it doesn't.
Well, that
it's
was
not a
your
problem.
mistake.
Just,
I've been purposefully putting off a rewatch until we
Right.
got caught up, so that I could just rewatch it in the moment. So I wasn't
I
like,
was
oh
constantly
well, I watched
comparing
it.
movie to book anyway. It was just like,
Yeah.
I
I just don't want to be
can't
like, oh
help
well,
it.
I watched it a month ago or whatever,
Of
and
course,
you know,
no, you just watch it like every weekend. It'll be fine.
it's got right. It's got to be raw and wiggling. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I don't just have like 4 hours every weekend to watch, one of the movies, let alone the 12 hours for all 3 of them. But
Watching a movie was easier than trying to find the time of reading the book, but because that just took sitting down and eyeballs, like I could have a movie on that I've seen several times before, like while doing a bunch of dumb paperwork, and okay, it worked out. Still very enjoyable.
it's not the same. That's literally the point of the show, was to read the book.
I
Not
did.
the same. Okay, just saying. Like,
Yeah, it was just easier to put a movie on that I've seen hundreds of times before.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Hundreds is a lot, but yeah.
Sometimes I just put it on because
So-
it's great. It sounds good. The movie was made so well. Every time I watch it, it's
Right.
just like, now that I've read the book, it's like, it's so faithful. Even with all the changes, it did it with intention of being faithful to the core of the story. Like the biggest difference so far that I've seen in this book is, well, Bombadil existing or not, and the description of Moria, that has how they got into it, is whether they expected it to be good and safe and easy and feastful, or if they knew that it was going to be something suspicious because they haven't seen Balin in 30 years. And the biggest things.
I think the reason it's able to do that is because of a couple little character changes, which when you get rid of the respite and you get rid of the like of a Bombadil, then you can increase the dread, ratchet up the dread kind of very effectively with almost the visual shock of the Black Rider in the very beginning of the movie. Then you don't need to have a lot of that other stuff that really builds out the world, but also kind of teaches about the things that characters are going to be talking about with, again,
there is
dreading.
I think a tonal shift a lot of the times of like, Gandalf describes that this is a big existential dread that's going to ruin the world. Let's fuck off with Bombadil for a month, or we have to keep moving and moving and moving. Or look like they spent 3 months in Rivendell, or they get out of Moria and then they spend a month in Lothlorien, and then they get out. Right. It was like, at least they had a description of like what happened to the days because the moon is in the wrong cycle, and what. So they had to just magic did some weird shit that they didn't realize that they lost a month, but.
It's.
I mean, that might be direct Fae allusions, though, wouldn't it? Because the elves are basically Fae, and going to the Fae realm, you lose time and all of that shit. That's interesting too.
It's the same that kind of happens in Elrond's realm, right? I think they talk about it, how they got trouble telling the days apart.
Not in Rivendell. They knew how many days
I think
were
in
passing.
Rivendell also, I think there was like something.
It was like Bilbo said that he was no longer counting the days because he was just kind of enjoying his retirement, more or less. But everyone else knew how many days were passing. But then after the Council of Elrond, they said that they needed to send out riders to scouts and figure things out. And that took 3 months for the big ones to come back. It was specifically Elrond's sons that they went to some place that they reported only at Elrond. And it's a mystery. Whatever they did or said, it hasn't been revealed yet. I didn't even know he had sons.
Yeah. In terms with what we were talking about with Tom Bombadil, also how that kind of out of place it feels. I think I was talking with my friend about this earlier, actually, how Tom Bombadil is a character he's written before and some short stories, and I think for stories for his children, kind of like The Hobbit, I believe. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's how it is. And I think he kind of just put him in there without really. I don't think he actually. It's not in the Silmarillion. It's not in any of the things we've ever seen exactly who or what Tom Bombadil is. I'm not sure Tolkien knew. He just put him in there because he felt like it.
Right.
I legitimately kind of just think that.
I actually looked this up. Just curious what people were saying. You guys are going to love this. It's been suggested that Tom Bombadil is the genus Loci.
Yeah, that's a pretty close.
I think I've heard that too. Yeah.
He is the spirit of the land of his area. That's why he can't leave. And he has a great ability in his area, but he's never going to leave it. He can't take the ring himself to Mordor.
But if he's the first, and if he was there before everything, how's he a genius loci of something that was created?
The land became sentient.
Well, yeah, I mean that's an explanation. I always took him as an avatar as well, for one of the gods, if not like a Luvatar or whatever, where it was just like he doesn't give a shit about the power because for him it's actually a lower tier of power, right? Because it's like, even the Maiar are tempted by it, and the Maiar are on Sauron's level, so he's something above that.
I'm not as blind as all that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so, but
yeah.
So Pippin, he's a jackass, huh? No.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking with my friend about this too. How Elrond specifically calls out, like, no, not the other hobbits, and then they're like, no, we really want to go. Okay, but not Pippin. I can tell bad juju is gonna happen with Pippin. And it's like I mostly know this from the movies, right? And what happens in this book is like all the things that gets fucked up is almost exclusively Pippin. He touches the thing. He twists the thing, it falls down. Yeah, everything.
Well, they juxtapose that slightly different in the movie, which is just it stays true to what happens, and yet it changes it a little bit.
Right.
Elrond did say that maybe you should go back and be a messenger to the Shire and let them know, but then they decided that no, we're staying with Frodo. It's okay, fine, you at least match the 9 ring rates. But when he dropped a pebble down a well when they were in Moria, it was much less disastrous. It did not cause them to be attacked by orcs and goblins and a cave troll. But putting it together in that way in the movie that they did is like, oh, we found Balin's tomb. They are coming. And then dropping it down the well with it was a huge clatter. Like that was the comedic moment. And it was also horrifying. And then we get the cave troll fight, which was great and fun.
What gets me, I forget if it was in the first book or the second book, there was the one point where somebody's saying something very serious, and then Pippin was like, oh, he just yawns immediately, like it's a laugh line.
I'm sorry, are you yawning while I'm breaking this down?
They did have the moment at Elrond's place that it's like, well, you need a people of intelligence of this sort of thing. And they just draw that out even more. And like, well, that leaves you out, Pip.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that also in the book? Because then I don't remember.
Yeah. No, he said that you need people of intelligence on this sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, it's funny too because I'll probably save it for when we get there, but it also gives into like one of my other favorite like Lord of the Rings memes, which is like, bad news, everybody. Sauron knows everything Pippin knows. So good news, everybody. Pippin doesn't know shit. So yeah, we'll revisit that when we get there. But yeah, it's fucking hilarious.
When you say that whole bad news, one thing I couldn't help about this comment I read yesterday on the whole new reboot of the Third Age Star Wars treatment, and the top comment on YouTube was somehow Sauron has returned, it cracked me up.
Please no.
More innocent age, huh?
Guys, it's not that hard. Like, even if it's a bad reason, just have a reason. Like, shit happens for a reason.
Money's
like, come on.
Reasons enough. Apparently, that's all they care about.
Yeah, it's enough for Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams, but I think it's just a little more, guys. Like, so yeah. Anyway, I know, like, yeah, the that's right. The news did come out recently that they're doing a new show, right, and all of that, or
they're doing
a new set of movies.
Again.
Yeah.
It's very vague right now because what they have said is the Star Wars treatment.
Yeah, I did see, like, I read their statement when it came out, like, that same day, and I was like, okay, they don't say as much as all the fans are like, oh my god, they're rebooting the movies, and I'm like, maybe, but I'm gonna wait. Look, man, the pitchfork is in standby, the lighter fluid's next to the torch, like, it's not gonna take me long to line up too. I'm just not doing it like months early.
But aren't you just excited about a potential Aragorn prequel that's kind of like The Witcher, where he runs around and protects the land as a ranger from Nade dwellers and evildoers and monsters?
Christopher's Tolkien comment about the movies. They took my father's work and turned it into an action movie for those 18 to 35. I feel that now.
Yeah,
when you say that.
was great.
Yeah,
so, that's why we liked it, because we were those 18 to 35-year-olds, except for you. You were 12. Shut up. So
we all know if we're getting like the trilogy again, It's gonna be book 1 Lord of the Rings, book 2 Lord of the Rings, book 1
Oh, you think
2 Towers, book 2 2 Towers.
you
It's
think
gonna
they're
be
gonna
6
stretch it out into
movies.
6?
Yeah, of course they're gonna make it into 6 movies. It got a
So
milk.
this time we do get
I could
Bombadil and all the
see it.
songs.
Yeah.
We're gonna get
That-
Bombadil and
dude,
his
that
yellow
would be
boots.
Look, see,
If
that'd be
they-
perfect for like an episode. They have the Bombadil episode, and then he comes back for the next one, and they just have another party. Like 2
Bombadil's
episodes
actually
Bombadil.
the 10th member of the Fellowship.
Oh,
So,
no.
you know.
Oh, thank you.
No, it's Gollum.
Right? Yeah.
Oh,
Good one, Andreas. So,
Gollum is an interesting. In the extended version of the Fellowship, they show that Gollum's been following them around. Especially, they have a conversation in Moria about it. And in the book, he is much more present. And they figured it out way earlier, or at least Frodo did, of just like these eyes keep following. And Sam describes like he's in the water.
like even
There's,
before
like,
they
this
left the
long-
Shire, right? Like he sees him like in the dark. He sees these eyes in the dark or whatever, or something.
Don't
Maybe,
remember
and I
that.
vaguely remember maybe it was in the story that like Aragorn was saying that he was in the woods near the Shire and they kind of got lost, but he was being held captive by Legolas and whatever their group of elves were called, I forgot. But then he got away when orcs had attacked, and that's why the orcs were attacking at the end of the Fellowship, is that Gollum was drawing them to there, trying to get them to kill each other, and then he would try to steal the ring. Instead of like in the movies, it was kind of like, well, now the bad guys are here, and it was fine. Action movies, I'm here for it. That's great. But this is how it happened. In particular, is Gollum led them there so he could try to snatch the ring.
I don't remember that. Yeah, that's a really
It was
good.
a very
tidbit.
subtle
So,
line at the end of the book, and it just like, oh, got it.
Right.
It's something I want.
Really interesting. So that's in the I guess I missed that line in the book. That's in the book that Gollum is the one causing all this. Is that what you're saying? That was understood.
Gollum was tracking them, and he kept somehow coordinating or leading them in some fashion, the orcs, to the Fellowship.
Do you think it was deliberate, like he was like sick 'em boys, or was it more like, was the sense of it more that it was just inadvertent? He's just not a very good person and not very good at being invisible, and he's very easily
He's pretty
tracked.
good at being invisible for the most part, except
That's
the fact
true.
he was following them for almost a year, and that's why they're able to find him in different parts. I think it was opportunistic, or at least I'm reading into it, that it was opportunistic and manipulative, because he is a scavenger and not much of a fighter. And so he's not going to go up against Boromir and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. So it's like,
So
get the other people.
A little bit nasty. Okay, I dig it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun detail. So it was funny when you were explaining it. So you're telling me that the guy that has been able to go invisible at will for like the last 500 years is really bad at hiding? Like, that's crazy. Like, no, but yeah, I mean, he is super sneaky, but it just kind of struck me in the moment. I was like, wait a minute, why is he super sneaky? You know, but yeah.
It's another thought I had when we're for comparing book to movie. When we're gonna watch is a thing I thought of is the whole York High, and it's the York High chasing them, and the ending climax scene. That's not York High's in the book, right?
No, they mentioned it.
Okay.
Well,
yeah.
So this fight hasn't happened.
They mentioned that they're
yet.
from Isengard, at least, don't they, or something like that? Like,
or is that because it's in the start?
Like they've got the white hand, so.
Okay.
Well, so this fight that kills Boromir hasn't happened yet. This will be probably in the beginning of the Two Towers, and so it's like a cut right between.
Right.
But they mentioned that the Uruk-hai were being
book,
sent out by Mordor as well, and so Isengard is probably making more of them, but they did exist previously.
Right.
Another thing I think is fun for you guys to notice for when we watch the movie and then talk about it next time is how far they came in terms of Gollum, because they show Gollum a little bit, and he's he doesn't. There's only like a little where he like peeks up from what I remember from a stone or something, and he looks very not as good as he does in the next movies. How far that from the production point of view for the next one, how much they actually also for the time, just how insane it was. It's so
they won an Academy Award for that effect eventually, just not in the first one. Definitely.
Yeah, that's because it was, you can see they hadn't nailed it in the first one. I also think that's why maybe you only see that one scene.
Right.
One thing. Oh, go ahead.
Just, I was just gonna say, like, leading into that, to me, it's more interesting because they filmed those movies practically simultaneously, right? Like that they were, filming them in sequence and whatnot. So it's just kind of interesting that for us, like the movies came out, the year after or longer in some cases, but just that it's like there was not that much time to iterate, to improve those graphics. So, what were you gonna say, Ben?
Well, I was going to change the topic to something else about Pippin again, Marion Pippin.
Fucking Pippin, man. No, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just that.
No, I love him. I just think it's funny to.
One thing I
rag
really
on
got this is that in the book, if there's a character who's comic relief, it's Pippin especially, but also Mary, where they're almost, where there's almost this kind of level of the fellowship where there's like the serious adults are talking. And they're always wrong. They turn out to be, but they're talking very seriously. It's really working hard to fixing it. And consistently, Pippin drops in, and doesn't necessarily. I know you guys said screwed up, but I think there's also just he confronts it, and he kind of he sees through things with like a youthful clarity, whereas people are thinking with lots of experience and lots of assumptions. And there was one point where Mary, I know it's the Melon door, right? He asks what it means, and Gandalf explains it instead of just saying it, right? And if Gandalf had just said it, then door open,
right?
But so there's an interesting dynamic, I think, with the hobbits in general. Maybe not Frodo because he's being super neurotic and a little bit troubled, but the hobbits in general, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, especially, are have that kind of common sense that pierces through illusions and problems and troubles, and that's almost their superpower. Is they have a what in Discworld is called first sight, or where you see things and you see what it actually is rather than assuming you understand it, and it's just the simple act of seeing things for what they are is almost a superpower. And you see that with Sam and Old Man Willow, and you see that with Mary at the door, Pippin. I think it's Pippin at the door, and you'll see. I think that'll tie in very nicely with this whole inversion that Lord of the Ring does. That the little things of the world are actually mighty against the great evils of the world, which cannot withstand them. So it's this whole humility versus pride thing, and even the good members of the Fellowship have this sort of self-satisfaction or confidence, which is either unwarranted, or if it's warranted, it betrays them, as with Boromir, Aragorn, and Gandalf in Book 2. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm kind of just rambling.
I mean, the simplicity of hobbits being able to see straight through all of the other like buildup of illusions and issues that the big people see and pay attention to. I mean, it is a good thing, and like it is a childish thing in a way of like you'd see a kid that might say something that you're not supposed to say that, but the kid doesn't know that yet. And Pippin is really young; he's like 19 in the years of hobbits, and that means that he's like barely 12. Yeah,
6. Is there a thing where these? I think the Emperor has no clothes moment. Isn't there a thing like in D&D Second Edition where halflings have a bonus to illusion spells or something?
Gnomes are typically the illusionists.
Is it gnomes? Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I thought it was halflings.
I'd have to go back. Second edition is where I started, but it's been very many years since I think
it's gnomes. I think you're right.
Yeah, but gnomes are traditionally the illusionists for sure. So
never mind that.
Yeah, and they kind of carry some of that flavor through, but it's changed. But yeah, so
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I started with 5th edition, so I don't know.
Well, anytime you want Grandpa D&D to tell you the little bit he knows, they're still older, like you still can talk to the people that played, 1st edition and whatever when they were in high school or college. But
you ever played Chainmail?
No, I'm familiar with it, but I didn't play it.
I only know the name really, and its reputation.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about it that it's like chainmail is kind of like Warhammer, like Warhammer 40K, but they got so into the heroes that they kept statting them out to the point where they made a role-playing game off of it, because chainmail was more about like military tactics and battlefield stuff
I see,
than it was about the individual heroes. But then it got more interesting to play the heroes, and that's where sort of D&D evolved from. It was my understanding. So
it's interesting. I was the kid who I never played D&D second edition. I think once we tried and nobody knew what we were doing. But like D&D second edition, I was a kid at rallies who would have books checked out from the library, D&D second edition. Everyone had to stand up and cheer, but I was sitting either in the library or like even in like the stands of the stadium, just like sitting down, ignoring everyone and trying to read about the Tarask or something. This is before third edition came out. That's how long ago it was.
So yeah. Of course, it's going to glare and blur it, but Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, this is the player's handbook, and then I've got the monster manual right next to it. But yeah, like I don't think I read like the second edition stuff like back to back or anything like that. But when we got into 3.0 and 3.5, that's where I started to realize like, oh, I'm not only just like memorizing rules, I can pretty much tell you what page it's on. And that sort of thing. And so it got pretty ridiculous. 5th edition, less so, because most of the time I'm in the digital space. So it's like, I can tell you generally what book it's in and we can go find the rules or whatever. But yeah, with the digital stuff and just being able to search, you don't really need to have an index in your brain. But with 3.0 and 3.5, I had all of that shit, so, but nerd. Of course, I'm wearing the Hellfire Club, so wife got it for me, so gotta wear it. So 2 weeks, we'll watch the movie again, director.
Yeah. The fully extended, almost 5
hours.
Oh
yeah, the 4-hour one.
Like, yeah,
I think it's almost 5 hours.
You don't even need to say it. When you say I'm watching The Lord of the Rings, I'm like, oh man, what are you going to do with the other 4 hours of your day? Because like. You know how long it's going to take.
Of course, it should be the extended version. I don't know.
I mean, the extended versions, like as good as the theatrical releases were, plus or minus some of the more major changes, the extended versions are even more faithful to the books. And so like, especially like the Two Towers and leading into Return of the King and stuff like that. That's where I really enjoyed, like, you get to see like, Fangorn Forest moved and was also a participant in the Battle of Helm's Deep because it wrapped up the rest of the orcs, and shit like that. Like those moments were like, stuck with me from the books. And so seeing them in the extended edition, like I was like, yes, this is closer to what I was reading. This is what I enjoyed, So, yeah, definitely gotta watch the extended.
Oh yeah. All right. We'll watch movies in 2 weeks. And with Justin, we've got that short story coming out, Fugitive.
Hey, good. Did you know who the fugitive is?
No, it's a dog.
No.
Oh.
Yeah.
There was a small snippet that came out. The mouse has declared that you are a bad dog, which is the worst insult he can ever give to someone. So therefore, it's a dog.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we had an hour of speculation of who is it going to be, and it's someone new.
Well, because it was like, why is Mouse involved? So like that was the big hook. Like what possible combinations of Mouse and Kerberos would be,
Yeah. Well, we'll see. It comes out on Tuesday, and pre-order it for $5, and then after that it comes up to $7, something like that. But yeah, that's what we're talking to Dresden next week, and then movies in the week after that. Cool. We'll figure things out eventually.
Yep.